Hi, this is Holly Pizzo with the Mile High Flood District, and I'm recording this video for the Colorado Stormwater Center. I'm going to talk about the MS4 Phase 2 General Permit, and just a quick disclaimer, this is our interpretation of the design standards and roadway exclusions, and if you want more information, you can contact the Colorado Stormwater Center. The Colorado Stormwater Council is a good resource, and of course CDPHE, the Water Quality Control Division. The permit has a number of design standards, and I like to describe it as having kind of three main themes of design standards. And the first theme is volumetric treatment. So the first design standard is the Water Quality Capture Volume Standard, and it consists of installing control measures that are volumetric, that treat 100% of the WQCV for the captured area, and it also allows for those areas of the site, maybe a driveway, which you're not able to direct toward a volumetric SEM. It's configured in such a way that you can't, add an SEM and treat that driveway or whatever area you're not able to get to the SEM. So it says that up to 20% of your site can run off the site without treatment, but no more than 1 acre. So it needs to be less than 20% of the applicable development area and also less than 1 acre, which is really pretty big. Okay, so that's the first theme. The second theme is the pollutant removal standard. And this has that same 80%, 20% breakout, but it says that your SCM should treat at minimum the 80th percentile storm event to a median TSS less than 30 milligrams per liter. So it must reduce TSS to something less than 30 milligrams per liter. And again, if there's an area that you're not able to drain to the SCM and you can't put in a second or a third SCM to do it, then 20%, but no more than 1 acre, can go off-site without treatment. And all of these areas need to be recorded and described as to why you can't treat them in your drainage report or some other documentation. Okay, the third theme is runoff reduction. And this basically says, this design standard says that you can run impervious areas that are disconnected, or what we call unconnected impervious areas, UIA, onto a receiving pervious area, RPA. And if you do that in such a way that you are infiltrating or reducing the WQCV, infiltrating 60% of it, then the other 40% can run off site. All right, so those are the three general themes, and there are some other design standards that play into those themes. And one of them is regional treatment. So there's two regional treatment standards. This one is where your regional SEM is not within waters of the state. So you're outside of the stream for this. And this standard says that 100%, the SEM that it drains to needs to treat 100% of the WQCV for 100% of the area that's tributary to it. The second regional design standard is when your SEM is located in the stream in waters of the state. And this says that, first of all, consistent with the last one, the SEM is sized for 100% of the WQCV for the entire tributary area, everything that drains to it. But you also need to do something else. You need to do some level of treatment on site, and that is the 2010 rule, which states that 20% of the impervious area on your site needs to drain to receiving pervious area, and that receiving pervious area that it drains to needs to be at least 10% of the area that drains to it. The other thing that you have to ensure is that wherever that site comes into waters of the state, the distance and the full reach between that location and the SEM located in waters of the state needs to be considered a stabilized stream. There is also a design standard for constrained redevelopment sites. And so a redevelopment site is defined in the permit as an existing site that has at least 35% imperviousness before you redevelop it. And then your proposed site needs to be greater than 75%. So it has to be a redevelopment site, and it has to have an impervious footprint that makes it more difficult to put in 100% treatment. So you have to satisfy those two conditions and document them, and also document why it's not practical to meet the previous design standards. So some municipalities may choose to not allow for this design standard, or they may allow for it in certain instances. But either way, you need to document why you're not able to meet previous design standards. So this is in the theme of volumetric treatment, and it says that you need to capture at least 50% of the impervious area of the applicable development site, and you need to put in a volumetric treatment, such as an EDB, which is what's shown here, and that needs to be sized for 100% of the capture area. And then the rest of the site can be untreated. Then there's a constrained redevelopment site standard that uses the pollutant removal theme, and that is, well, it's the same requirements. It needs to be a redevelopment site, so at least 35% impervious before redevelopment and greater than 75% impervious after, and you need to document why you're not able to meet previous design standards. And then you need to put in some kind of flow through treatment that removes TSS down to 30 milligrams per liter. And you need to do that and ensure that you're capturing at least 50% of the impervious area of the applicable development site, and the rest can be untreated. And then there's a constrained redevelopment site standard under the runoff reduction theme, and the same requirements in order to use this design standard. And what this says is that your unconnected impervious area needs to drain onto receiving pervious area in a way that it infiltrates at least 30% of the WQCV that would come off of impervious areas otherwise. Okay, so there's also some exclusions, and I'm going to focus primarily on the roadway exclusions because these are applicable in all areas for Phase 2 MS4s. Everyone is dealing with this. They're a little bit confusing. So first I'll say that there are two kinds of exclusion, and the first will exclude the entire site, the whole project essentially. And then the second type of exclusion excludes a portion of your project. You first have to decide when to apply exclusions. So step one, is it an applicable development site? And applicable development sites are those that result in land disturbance of greater or equal than 1 acre. And I'll note this is triggered by land disturbance, not development area. It includes sites less than 1 acre that are part of a larger common plan of development or sale, unless excluded. And I'll go through the exclusions. And then step two, does the site meet one of the exclusions? And I would add step three, which is record keeping. Anytime you use exclusions, you need to go through the proper record keeping. Okay, here's a list of the exclusions. We're going to go through roadway exclusions. There's also an above and underground utility exclusion. There's an exclusion for large lot single family sites. There's an exclusion for non-residential and non-commercial infiltration conditions. There are what's called final use-based exclusions and then county growth areas. So the first exclusion is excluded pavement management sites. And I think it's really important to note here that this exclusion only applies to roadway pavement. So if you're doing a parking lot reconstruction that's over an acre, then it would not fall under this exclusion. It's not resulting in an increase of impervious area. And this would be a full site exclusion. The next is excluded roadway redevelopment. So let's say that you are increasing the impervious area. As long as you are not increasing it beyond the limits defined in this exclusion, then your project is excluded. So the pavement can be excluded when the additional impervious area is less than 1 acre per mile of roadway or no more than 8.25 feet at any location. So either or, then the entire project is excluded. Let's say you don't meet that exclusion, but you are adding impervious area to an existing roadway. You may fall under this exclusion, excluded existing roadway areas, and this is not a full site or project exclusion. This one only excludes a portion of the roadway if you meet it. So you're more than 1 acre per mile, or you're more than 8.25 feet, but you're not doubling the roadway. You could use this exclusion, and this exclusion would exclude just the existing roadway. So you would still have to treat the additional impervious area, which is that lower, darker section of the roadway there. And this one gets tricky because it's hard to just capture the drainage area of the additional impervious area, but you must treat all of that darker area, which means you probably are treating at least some of the lighter or existing roadway. There's also an exclusion for above ground and underground utilities. There's an exclusion for large single family sites. So if your impervious area is less than 10% and your lot is greater than 2.5 acres, then the lot and the work on the lot is excluded. If you're also putting in roadways, of course, to connect these residents together, that would not fall under the exclusion. There's an exclusion for non-residential and non-commercial infiltration conditions, which essentially says that if you are infiltrating the full WQCV, you don't need to provide additional treatment. There's an exclusion for undeveloped land that's disturbed as part of your project, but the final site condition, it remains undeveloped. And then there are exclusions for stream stabilization sites. There's an exclusion for trails, including bike and pedestrian trails, as long as those are not attached to a roadway. And there's also an exclusion for oil and gas exploration. The last exclusion is with regard to county growth areas. You can see 4 items that would be excluded under this exclusion if they occur in a county growth area. So this is not applicable to cities or urbanized areas or the Cherry Creek Reservoir watershed. The first of the 4 items refers to a date that has now passed. The second is for agricultural facilities and structures on agricultural zoned lands. The third refers to a residential development site or larger common plans for development where you have land disturbance less than 10 acres and have a proposed density of less than 1,000 people per square mile. And the last is for commercial or industrial development sites or a larger common plan of development where you have construction activities and land disturbance of less than or equal to 10 acres. That's a summary of the design standards and inclusions in the Phase 2 MS4 permit. There are a lot more details in the permit, so if you're looking for more information, please download the permit. I hope this was helpful.